and a woman called Mrs. Kramer, Frau Kramer, but none offers him a solution since he rejects all their values. He's accompanied on his journey by a mysterious figure called the Other One, der andere, or in a most recent production in Weimar, die andere, who repeatedly encourages him to try again and never give up. Other figures include death and a lachrymose old man, God, in whom no one believes in anymore. Another link to the Skittle Alley. In the end, Beckmann is left alone with his questions. Will no one give me an answer? Left echoing on an empty stage. The Man Outside was conceived as a stage play, but the Hamburg-based Northwest German Radio premiered it as a radio play on the 13th of February 1947 as part of a weekly Thursday evening series of new plays in German. It was the right play at the right time and was immediately a huge success both in Germany and beyond. Borchert literally became famous overnight, though the play was not without its detractors who felt he'd insulted the German army and the play was too pacifist. The play was given its theatre premiere in Hamburg on the 21st November 1947. Borchert had died in Switzerland the day before. His death was announced to the stunned audience before the performance. It has since become one of the most often performed plays on the German stage, and worldwide, unbelievably, worldwide, it has also become the most often performed play written in the German language. We will look at the Skittle Alley, the story of war, in just a moment. But let's take a brief look at Borchert's own wartime experiences. And here I'm largely going to let Borchert speak for himself, as it were, because I'll be mainly quoting excerpts from some of his wartime letters. Borchert was sent to the Eastern Front after his second court-martial to act as a messenger. Because of his sentence, he was attached to a punishment battalion and initially was not permitted to carry a weapon, though a little later on his battalion commander did allow him a rifle. Incidentally, there's a very well-informed radio play based on Borchert's life entitled Messenger Without a Weapon, written by the English poet and dramatist Eddie Lawler, 2012. Writing from Minsk in February 1943, so I got an error message. Can you still see me? Yeah, carry on.
Yes, we see you and hear you.
Okay. I got an error message here saying you couldn't. Okay, I'll carry on. Borchert wondered to one friend of many years standing, as you see here, should I tell you about the awful things happening here in Russia? He seems to have experienced 2 bouts of actual frontline warfare in December 1942. In December, on the 17th of December, he wrote to his parents, yesterday we got back from 10 days of hard fighting in the forest day and night. Some 5 weeks later, he opened up a little more. December was almost too awful for me. Can you imagine running around without a weapon in the forests and between the Russians? To another, he opened up, quote, and in the meantime, I experienced a lot, terrible things. The days near Toropez were terrible when I had to run through the dreadful forest at night as a messenger. The days in the infectious diseases field hospital, Seuchenlazarett, were terrible when every night the dead were being carried out. But in the background, there were always such ugly words like enteritis, gastritis, and hepatitis. In fact, it was only in March that year that he was able to admit to another long-term friend that during the horrific days near Toropez before Christmas, within 4 days, we lost 5 company commanders. And looking back on his January experiences towards the end of March, when he was recovering back in Germany, in Elend, that's the name of the place, not his condition, in a military convalescent home, he wrote to his parents, perhaps you read about Toropez in the newspapers at the time. That must be enough. The individual events are just too terrible, and he wouldn't tell you anything. Would it have been a comfort for you if I'd written to you that in the infectious diseases and typhoid field hospital in Smolensk, 6 dead were carried out each day, and that in the cemetery in front of our window, there were over 700 crosses, 700 graves just for the dead from typhus fever. And he continues, and I'm certainly not able or willing to wind back this film of horror retrospectively once again, since I'm far too glad to have escaped alive from this hell again. Around the same time, he admitted that he was still physically suffering from the stress and trauma he'd experienced in Russia. This Russia, he wrote, has really taken it out of me. I've lost all the contemplativeness, Besinnlichkeit, I don't know a better translation for it, Besinnlichkeit, and calm that's needed to go into anything deep. And I've become terribly nervous and unsettled. But first of all, my hands must calm down again before they can do anything. And now they're still trembling with fear, distress, hunger. And he continues in the same letter, on the other hand, it's exposed the true person in me. Only a thing that has clawed itself into the snow with animal fear for its little bit of life. That you had to humiliate yourself so much, that was what was so horrific. In the midst of all this, these memories, perhaps most heartfelt, the most sincere comment of Borchert's is this: we have only one wish and one desire, peace. And this thought is so great that everything else next to it seems too small to think about it much. Actually, Borchert spent rather longer in prison than fighting at the front. He spent roughly 14 months in prison as opposed to 5 at the front. But the combination of both experiences, especially being in prison in Berlin Moabit prison for almost 9 months, left their marks on him both mentally and physically. After spending 8 months on remand, plus another of being sentenced, he wrote late in October 1944 to a long-term friend how his nerves had been shot to pieces. Berlin affected me more than I thought. Over the last few days, I had an argument with a comrade, half serious and half joking. I really had to control myself with all my might, otherwise I would simply have strangled him. I hope it's just some nerves which got a little jolt and it will disappear by and by, he says. In the light of these experiences, how does Borchert transmute the theme and events of war into literature? Let's have a look at the Skittle Alley by way of comparison. The first paragraph, which we've already heard, of the Skittle Alley begins with a bold, almost banal statement: 2 men had made a hole in the earth. The rest of the paragraph takes us a little further, but moves from the banal to the surreal with the disturbing and discordant descriptions of the hole, both pleasant, roomy, bearable, almost cozy, but like a grave. Let's just pause here for just a moment, because in typical Borchert fashion, this opening paragraph raises more questions than it answers. We don't know who these men are, or why they should have felt the need to make a hole in the earth. We don't know where they are, geographically or otherwise. We don't know when this is taking place. We don't know what they're doing here. We don't even know where they are in relation to the hole yet. Have they just dug it? We're standing next to it, admiring their work. And it's only said to be like a grave, not that it is one. The second paragraph focuses on a gun, not the gun yet, a gun, in front of the 2 men, and outlines its function in a coldly impersonal manner. The German term, which I've translated here as you, is Mann, one. When I was teaching German, and my students always want to translate man as one. One does this, one does that. They used to say, look, you're not Princess Anne, she's the only one who's allowed to say one, but perhaps that joke is a European one, I apologize. Anyway, at this stage, the 2 men are not involved in doing anything. In fact, they're merely passive background figures. It's the gun and what it can do is a central stage. Let's move on. It's only in the 3rd paragraph that things become clearer and the relationship between the 2 men, the hole in the earth, and the gun becomes evident. What we have here are 2 snipers, and we immediately witness them in action. This too is delineated in a cold, impersonal, mechanical fashion. The men do as they are ordered, automatically, without compunction, without any apparent feeling. And it transpires this has been going on for several months. And we finally got to the sentence, then the head was kaputt. I suggested just now that all of this is impersonal somehow, and this is emphasized by the fact that the two men are only, if I can put it that way for a moment, shooting at heads. They are only, again, with inverted commas, making heads kaputt, not actually killing. There is, however, an inkling of the realization that they are shooting at humans. Throughout the text, the two snipers are only referred to by the term men, Männer in German, not as soldiers or even as snipers. Their targets are referred to, on the other hand, as human beings, people. The German term used is Mensch, and this is all the way through the story. This inkling of a realization is developed in the next section of the story, where the effect of all this killing on the two men's psyche is shown. While the two men can apparently suppress their emotions while carrying out their orders to kill, they wake up from nightmares directly related to their killing. In their dreams, the heads become depersonalized, dehumanized, nothing more than balls in the skittle alley. This is the only time, incidentally, that the term skittle alley actually occurs in the text, and even then it's only as a simile, like in a skittle alley. For an interpretation of the skittle alley metaphor, we need to look at the lines placed above the text proper. And these are the lines above the text. They're pretty self-explanatory, it seems to me. They embrace both the perpetrators of the killing, the two men, and their victims, and erase the differences between them. The devastation of the emotional and mental health of the two men is further underpinned in their conversation, which veers between screaming and whispering, between groaning at the horror and detached from all humanity, taking some sort of escapist, grotesque pleasure in it. The two men discuss the existence or otherwise of God in what is seemingly a godless world. And in this godless world, the full weight of the responsibility for this killing rests solely on these two men themselves. They have no excuse, they have no choice. And they have no choice, of course, but to follow orders. When towards the end of the tale, an unidentified someone calls out an order to start shooting again, the whole process begins anew. Whether it will ever come to an end remains unresolved. One of the characteristics of this story is the extent to which every actor in the story is seemingly detached from all the others. There is apparently no personal connection between any of them, save the sequence of events which has resulted in the present situation. It all seems passive somehow, undeliberate, accidental. The gun was invented to kill people. Its inventor was rewarded. Someone unseen, off stage as it were, has given an order and does so again at the end. There's no connection between those killing and those being killed, apart from the event, the action itself. Everyone seems powerlessly caught up in a chain of events not of their own making. And in the end, it all comes down to these two men alone in their hole in the earth, stuck with it. This sense of a curiously unconnected chain of events is echoed and reinforced by the narrative style. The account is economical, bold, without any embellishment. It reads more like a report than an imagined story. There's no attempt to push the reader in an interpretation in one direction or another. On the contrary, the reader has to make their own connections and come to their own verdict on the actions, behavior, morality, attitudes of the two men. As is so often the case with the Borchert short story, there is so much that we are not told. Although this is evidently a wartime scenario, we don't know when or where this is taking place. We don't know the nationality of the men or their victims. We don't know which armies are involved, or indeed whether these are regular troops, whether they're enlisted men, are they mercenaries? There's one curious thing, and in case anyone here is interested in translation, when I translated this into English, I stumbled over the name Inge. In an English text, this would suggest that the snipers are Allied forces and they're shooting at Germans. or German-speaking troops. I'm pretty sure this wasn't Borchert's intention, though, and the published version, translated by David Porter, changed the name from Inge to Anna, which is, I think, both correct and quite inspired as a translation. But I kept Inge in mind. But here, as in all his stories, Borchert does not take sides. So, conclusion, very brief. In the space of about a page and a half, Borchert has packed a huge amount. The mechanization of war, the development of technology to enable killing on an ever larger scale, the questions of morality and responsibility, the helplessness of the individual soldier or in giving or having to follow orders, the impact of a soldier's actions on his own mental, emotional, spiritual well-being, what we nowadays call PTSD, the sheer inhumanity of war, and even the potentially problematic relationship between war and religion. All of this is left open to question. None of these issues raised in the Skittle Alley is resolved. Borchert leaves that to the reader. Thank you very much. Oh, I was finished.
Thank you so much, Professor Burgess. That was very interesting. And in theater we have this. Since Borchert was a theater person, instead of applauding, we're snipping the fingers. And if anyone in the audience feels like it, snip the fingers. That's your applaud on Zoom. And I see many fingers snipping. Thanks a lot. Yeah, this is not an easy topic, so it's very calming and very insightful, I feel. I would like to open up really to questions and answers. I saw one hand held up. I would like to maybe initialize, if somebody holds back with their questions, saying one thing. Through your remarks on how decontextualized actually the characters are in this story, which I was not consciously aware of, this made clear to me why I think actually that Wolfgang Borchert is one of those German, but really in general, writers that should be really found and played and read in the United States of America in this moment of history, when there are so many discussions about PTSD, not only and violence, not only and gun violence, not only at home here, but also the soldiers now coming back from Afghanistan, or all of us coming out of the corona pandemic, at least here in America. There are so many things in the work, I think, of Borchert that can be translated into other societies. And probably the reason is that he keeps it so decontextualized. The other thing is a question to you. Do you think it helped him writing on a therapeutical level, or would he have written that anyway, so to speak?
I've no idea, to be honest. We have to bear in mind that Borchert really wanted to become an actor. He saw a performance of Faust in Hamburg with very famous German actor. Anyway, from that point on, he wanted desperately to become an actor. He only became a writer because he couldn't act, and he was bedridden. And in fact, almost all of his stories are small dramas. They can be acted out, full of dialogue and full of drama, coming to a conclusion, sometimes not. Yes, it may have been therapeutic for him. And certainly he was writing, I suppose he was writing things out of his system in a way. He was certainly drawing on his own experiences. But I think it's fair to say that everything in a Borchert story happened, but nothing happened as it is portrayed. And he always has this distance between the events as he remembers them. He draws on his own experiences, he draws on other people's experiences, but there's a distance between that and when he puts it on paper. And I think this gives his writing quite a strength. It's not constrained. He was actually criticized for this after the war, immediately after the war, that he was too general, that he wasn't focusing enough on German guilt. Although there is Das ist unser Manifest, which begins with Helm up, wir haben verloren. But there is, I think, a universality about Borchert, which comes from this, what you call it, decontextualization. Yeah.
That's interesting. Any other questions in the audience? You can either write in the chat or just open up your microphone and shoot out a question, or you can raise your hand. And there's somewhere in a function for that.
I think Eddie Lawler has got his hand.
Okay.
Then, can I go back to Borchert's youth and his failure at school? He and his friends were known as the Hamburg Swing Kids because they were very keen on American music. It's one reason they got in trouble with the Gestapo. But he also worked in a bookshop, and I wonder if there's any evidence of what he read when he was working in this bookshop, because his stories have the sparseness and insight of a writer like Hemingway. Not a word is wasted. And I wondered if there's any influence in the background there from his short spell as an assistant in the bookshop.
Yes. Come back to this. Yes, he actually hated the bookshop. He thought it was mind-numbing, partly because he and a friend called Werner Lüning, who was later to play quite a part in his life, because Werner Lüning became a member of the Robert Publishing Company in Stuttgart. And Borchert wrote quite a lot of letters to Werner after the war. Anyway, he and Werner Lüning, as the two new apprentices, were sent down to the basement of the bookshop to package up books for delivery, being on order, and to label them. And they amused themselves and whiled away the time by reading what was in the basement, tucked away from public view, which was expressionist literature. And I don't have the exact books on me, but they got quite a few in the Borchert box in Stabi. And we do know that Borchert and Lüning read the expressionist literature that was in the basement of the bookshop. They didn't take it home, obviously. Not obviously, knowing Borchert. And there they did, but quite what they read, we don't know. But yeah, that is his bookshop experience. And of course, in the bookshop, he was also denounced for this. This is what on the part of the second trial he had. He was denounced by one of his co-workers there because she had a boyfriend in the Gestapo, and she wanted to curry favor, let us say, with the Gestapo boyfriend. And part of that currying favor was to denounce Borchert, who had read some poems by Rilke to her and others. And in his letter referring to Rilke, the Gestapo seized the letter, got hold of him, and said, "Who is this man called Rieke, that you, R-I-E-K-E, in other words, that you are so in love with?" And Borchert said, "Rieke, I don't know Rieke." And they showed him the letter, and it was where he expressed his admiration for Rilke. This came out while he was being beaten up at Gestapo headquarters in Hamburg. And I think the Gestapo officer that realized the mistake And that's how Borchert was allowed out next day. So a lot of it going on.
Mhm.
When you have your microphone on, you're in the center of all of us, and you have to ask a question or a comment.
I think it was Gründgens you were trying to think of.
Gründgens, that's it, yes, Gustav
Yeah.
Gründgens. Yes, Staatsschauspieler.
Yeah, so is it.
And a very complicated figure.
Indeed. So
Yeah.
it is, yes. Aber die Hamburger mögen ihn trotzdem, nicht wahr?
Ja, ja und nein.
So und so, ja. Stimmt wohl.
Yeah.
He said that Gründgens Hamlet was the reason for his passion for the theatre. He wrote it down in one of his letters. It was thanks to Gründgens that he really wanted to become an actor. So.
I think there's a question by Phoenix Alexis.
It's not so much a question, but just a comment. It was just kind of interesting to hear about his life, because I'm not familiar with Wolfram. I'm not familiar at all, but of course the whole drawing was to be introduced to him. And I found it really interesting that there was a quality of hapless luckiness. It's like he was a lucky man that haplessly got into whatever he got into in the end. I'm like, to be denounced so many times because he happened to not fully grasp the gravity of what he's involved in, even in a joke, and yet come out of it and be able to harness a career, a following from that. I find that amazing. I just found him like an amazing human being, just like amazing in the sense that he was a very simple human being, not an intellect, because it doesn't strike me as being an intellect, just a simple person that was able to get his art across. So it's the haplessness, almost like a buffoonery into getting where he got to.
Yeah, I quite agree. When you consider the time in which he lived and the way in which he expresses himself in his letters, in the way in what he did I mean, Eddie Lawler mentioned the swing kids. These swing kids would dress up in what they thought were English clothes, English suits, smartly. They would go out around Hamburg. They would listen to English music, American music. They knew they knew where they would like to be thrown into a concentration camp for nothing. And yet Borchert did this in his letters. A lot of his letters had to be destroyed during the war because
I can imagine.
There was one time when he saw some concentration camp inmates being taken from one camp to another, and he had all the soldiers had been told to stay inside their barracks, and for some reason this order didn't reach Borchert's little bit, and so they were outside and they saw this procession of concentration camp inmates, and Borchert describes this in not just one but two letters. And in one of the letters, which is still extant, he said, "Und alle 10 Meter ein Schwein von SS-Mann." Every 10 meters, a swine of an SS man. Now, when you think that for the joke, telling a joke about Goebbels, that they wanted the death penalty, he wrote this in one letter to his parents. He wrote it in another letter to another friend. There it is, well, it's actually blue and white, but incredible. I actually, there was a book in German, a biography of him, which is entitled "Ich glaube an mein Glück," I believe in my good luck, which he did. And he had
obviously.
For his three trials, his three court-martials, he had a three court-martials, yeah. And he had a very good defense lawyer for each of them. I mean, there are other tales about it. His mother went and talked to the prosecuting counsel and so on. But he was incredibly lucky. Three times they demanded the a death sentence for him in Nazi Germany, and 3 times he got off, sort of. So you're right, I'm absolutely right.
And the only thing I wanted to add is that I just happened to attend a previous Zoom with Sophie Skoll. And
Oh yeah,
so I'm like, I knew about her story tentatively, but not, in the full scope of it. But for somebody to escape death 3 times haplessly, and then for somebody who knew that every single movement that she made would bring her to death.
yeah.
And it's amazing how people's fates are, it's not the necessary straight line.
Yeah,
It's
I agree.
amazing. Just by attending the 2 Zooms that I've seen already. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
That was a beautiful comment. I think we have time for one more comment or question. And I saw Marianne Lancaster raising her hand. Is that still going on?
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had the feeling that Schießbefehl, as you say in German, this you get an order and you shoot. That hasn't been resolved in any way. It is still a problem. And it's something, it's so frustrating that we made no progress in that direction. And it's international. There are Schießbefehle, the orders to kill, in all armies. The big deal in Germany was, of course, with the Berlin Wall, and then some of the guards were put, they were sued for it. But I never heard the real solution. And if you ask a general, he says, well, if I tell my soldier to do something, they have to do it. How strong is our moral responsibility? But otherwise, again, you look at an army where everybody decides, no, we're going to do this today. So I just think he shows it so quickly how it becomes just mechanical, that you don't think. Somebody tells me, so I do it. I have the gun that will do it. And the frustrating thing is our guns get more and more complicated, more sophisticated. We are better than then. We could kill many more. One person could kill a sniper nowadays. So that's so scary. That's all.
I agree. And I mean, for me, part of the strength of this short story, the Skittle Alley, or Die Kegelbahn, is that all of this is in it, in a very concentrated manner. Very, very concentrated. It's a page and a half. I don't know how many words it is, probably about 600. And you have all these issues brought up to the reader. It's not taking sides. It's not saying one side is good or one side is bad, one side is morally right, one side is not, and so on. It is simply stating it, and that's it. It's I mean, when I go back when I was teaching, I used to teach Borchert at undergraduate level, and sometimes I was allowed to teach Burl. And when I was teaching Burl, I always had to explain so much to begin with. I had to explain the Wirtschaftswunder and the Catholic background and so on. Borchert, I didn't have to explain anything. Just go in with the text, read it, and immediately the students were able to relate to it.
Yeah, I think, and that is true also for his play, Draußen vor der Tür and everything. It really, I agree. It's very condensed and it's really art, in my opinion. It's really worked through. And if you think about it, in a very short amount of time as well.
Yeah.
And not being healthy and being starving and everything. It's, so again, my question, not my question to you, I place it for everyone to think. Was it his art that gave him strength, or was it his strength that he gave to his art, or is it a circle or something in that matter? Again, Professor Burgess, I thank you a lot for this introduction into the work and life of Wolfgang Borchert, and I really encourage everyone to maybe check out books of Wolfgang Borchert in English translation or German original or any translation. It's really, 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 really worth it. And since there are so many members of the Wolfgang Borchert Gesellschaft, I think it should really, a goal should be, in some sense, to make America, or more Americans aware of his work. And if there's any way to do that, I would be happy to receive emails on that at Goethe Atlanta. Viola Westbrook, you were raising your hand.
I'm sorry, I know it's late. I just wanted to say that I used the Lesebuchgeschichten from Borchert for years and years, especially during the Vietnam era, in our German classes. And I found them healing for certain people who had experience of war, like in Vietnam, and they helped us through quite a few dark moments in their supposed objectivity, which hid so much pain and so much knowledge. So I found these Borchert stories, and the Lesebuchgeschichten were accessible to German students. So they were a great help during those times. And so I think your question, Oliver, is very good. Did the art give him strength, or did he give the art his strength? So I think it was circular. Thank you. Thank you both. I really enjoyed the presentation, Dr. Burgess. Thank you.
Glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
One more hand there. I don't know.
Okay.
William?
Anyone else?
You have a
Okay.
One very quick thing I just want to say. I had in prep school in Germany, we read Draußen vor der Tür, and I never have forgotten it. That's how good he is.
Yeah.
Right.
Another book was Indian Camp by Hemingway. I never have forgotten that. So there are just some stories, and I think we need to give these short stories to our students so that they have some typical example and can heal or learn from it, I hope.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a good last word. Okay, I thank you all in Germany and Britain to stay up so long, and for the others to not be in the sun, but in Atlanta, or maybe in the sun and watching us. This Monday at 7:30, there will be a panel discussion about Sophie Scholl and her legacy in the world, with writers and with a young female mayor from Afghanistan, and with the Bremen Jewish Heritage Museum at 7:30 on Monday. And on the birthday of Borchert, we will have the panel discussion, Show Your Wound, with artists who have kind of the similar story to Borchert and Beuys, having been in combat, but in this case, American soldiers, and what they make out of it in their art. And the question will again be, does it help you? Or who is it supposed to help? Or is it nothing? Thank you very much, Professor Burgess, first and foremost.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
And of course, for this wonderful international audience. Come back anytime, even if you're in Germany. You're more than welcome, and come back if you are in the southeast of America, of course. And with these words, I say danke und auf Wiedersehen, or as they say in Hamburg, tschüss.
Cheers.
In Hamburg sagt man tschüss.
Ja.
Das heißt auf Wiedersehen.
Okay, Hummel, Hummel, Herr Oliver.
Hummel, Hummel, Mors, Mors. Alles klar.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Nice to
Bye-bye.
meet you together. Thank you.